Okay, so if the previous video didn't quite do it for you, I wanted to try to put into a nutshell my current understanding of this issue. We've already explored how it's not right to say God wants there to be evil and suffering in the world and how that's a dead end philosophically and spiritually speaking to think that way. Um, and we've already explored how consciousness clearly wants a wide open playing field for itself because that's what it has manifested for itself. Um, a field of seemingly infinite possibilities, but perhaps only seemingly infinite possibilities. I, for one, do not believe that anything like eternal torment in a hell realm is possible. And so, if that's not possible, which again, I strongly believe that it is not possible, and that would mean that there's a limit to the open playing field which consciousness has manifested for itself. Um, and this is perhaps a self-imposed constraint, right? That the seemingly infinite possibilities are not in fact infinite, that there is no such thing as eternal torment for some beings and eternal bliss for others. There's no such thing as eternal anything, which is good news, actually. Um, so if somebody asks, why suffering? I think the best answer to that question is that the one already implied in the previous video, which is that when people are not in touch with the source of love, presence, and connection that they have within themselves at the deepest level of their own being, when they're not in touch with that, um, a lot of things become possible that otherwise wouldn't be. So, like I said, we desperately scramble for tiny crumbs of happiness or pleasure when we're not in touch with this deeper source of joy. And as we see, human beings are all too willing to step on the other guy's face when attempting to climb this ziggurat of accomplishment or satisfaction in the world. And that would not be possible, is not possible when you already have access to this source of profound joy and fulfillment within yourself. So it's not the case that quote unquote awakened beings or enlightened beings are saintly for moral reasons. There doesn't have to be a built in morality because such awake beings are incapable of meaningless harm to others or harming others for the sake of their own gain because they need no gain. They don't need to accomplish anything, prove anything, or get anything. And that's exactly why the vast majority of harm causing behaviors become impossible for such beings, even without any kind of moral code or ethics. So that's an important consideration. So we all understand that hurt people. That is to say, people suffering are more likely to lash out at others. People suffering their own severe intergenerational trauma are likely to visit it upon their perceived enemy, as we see over and over again in the Middle East. Um, but let's not imagine that that's the only reason that people hurt people. I think it is a major reason, maybe even the biggest. But there's also the problem of ideology. that humans have this unique capacity seen in no other animals to fabricate stories and then believe their own stories, to create myths and then take their myths as if they were fact or truth. And that's called an ideology. So whether the ideology is a religion or something else, um, Marxism or any number of things, Zionism, jihadism, these are all ideologies. And if they're taken to be true instead of just a story that reflects the values of the people who made that story, then you become dangerous. And so believe it or not, it is possible for people who are not deeply traumatized individuals to become radicalized into an ideology which functions as something like a mind virus that takes them over and makes them capable of doing terrible things. We've seen examples of this, young, like early 20 something suicide bombers and jihadists and others uh, who do terrible things on the basis of an ideology that they fervently and zealously believe. They believe that they're doing good by killing apostates or atheists or whoever else, and that the innocents that they kill will automatically go to heaven forever, and therefore there's no such thing as collateral damage. Suicide bombers actually believe this, um, and they say so, and I think we should take them at their word. So, but that's just one of many, many, many possible examples. Obviously, the Third Reich was also an ideology, and according to that ideology, um, uh, the Jews needed to be exterminated to make way for the prosperous and beneficial thousand-year Reich, which would be a wonderful thing for everyone else. Okay, so everyone likes to cite the example of Hitler as ultimate evil, but that's severely problematic because um, by making Hitler or whoever else into this demon, you cease to ask the question, but why did he think what he thought? Of course he was deranged. Of course he was ill in several ways, but he believed he was doing good. He believed he was doing the right thing. He believed he was doing the best possible thing for his people. So that should give you pause. If Adolf Hitler truly believed he was doing good, and he did, by the way, research the history, um, then how do you know that you're doing good when you act on your ideological convictions? Right? You might think that, well, anti-racism, this is a good ideology. So when it motivates me to attack and harm those I perceive as racist, I'm doing good. I would say that you're subject in that case to the exact same confusion that Hitler was, though indeed to a lesser degree. So this bears some careful consideration. And it is indeed the case that there are no examples of awakened beings who cling to an ideology. None, zero. Of the many, many um, hundreds of enlightened ones documented, and of course, there's many, 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 many thousands undocumented as well, both alive right now and throughout history. But of the documented ones, we see not a single example of one that rigorously and rigidly clung to a dogma or ideology and called for the extermination of those who opposed that ideology. We don't see any examples of that. That is significant. That is meaningful. So when addressing the causes of suffering, we can say that people cause others to suffer as well as themselves, of course, when they are traumatized and unable to digest their trauma, right? They visit that trauma upon others, um, because misery loves company, right? And also just sometimes because they just lash out because they can't do anything else. And we've seen that people who adopt ideologies, who come to believe in stories, even if they're not traumatized, will also tend to cause others tremendous suffering, and will suffer themselves in various ways. But if you fervently believe in an ideology, that suffering is buried until you wake up out of the ideology, and then you feel, only then you feel the true pain of what you've done. So, so both of these causes of suffering come from the same source, which is a lack of connection to our true nature. And that's why awakening and connecting to our true nature, not connecting is the wrong word, right? Inhabiting our true nature fully, abiding in our true nature, uh, that is the answer to all the world's problems. I say that very sincerely. And I don't have time in this video to explain why and how that might be the case. But I'm happy to discuss it with anyone, because if you think there's any problem that wouldn't be solved by a predominantly awakened humanity, then you don't yet understand the nature of awakening. Um, so we can't solve our problems politically. We can't solve them militarily. We can't solve them uh, economically, even if we had much more enlightened economic policies, which I do advocate for, it wouldn't be sufficient. Nothing will stop human suffering as long as the majority of people are almost entirely cut off, or even half cut off, from the source of fulfillment, joy, and love within themselves. They will simply continue to hurt others and themselves. And now, this brings me to my last point. Some of you look at this world and you see this suffering, you see the violence, and you can't bear it. And you say, I'm full of compassion, right? So you kind of eulogize your own suffering about others' suffering. And I would say, that doesn't actually help. If you are debilitated by your own suffering about the world's suffering, how can you help the world? You can't. And people sometimes see me address world issues like war in the Middle East or whatever with what they consider to be insufficient compassion, or I don't shed enough tears or whatever. But the thing is, if I take on that suffering in such a way that I'm debilitated by it, how could I help anyone? I can't help anyone in the Middle East, but I can help those within my sphere of influence, and they can help those within their sphere of influence, and so on. And that matters. That makes a difference, okay? But it's not just about not taking it on, because those people who position themselves as the truly compassionate ones say, "Oh, I don't purposefully take it on. My heart bleeds for them and everything." But see, here's the thing. It's actually the war in yourself that is causing you the true suffering. You are externalizing it by saying, "Oh, it's the Middle East conflict," or before that it was the war in Ukraine, and before that it was whatever else. The devastation in Yemen. Very few Westerners even noticed that, sadly, but if they did, then it might have been that. So, but there's a problem here. You think that it's the war, or the genocide, or whatever, causing you to suffer, causing you to feel this heartache. And I say, no, it's the war within yourself. It's the fact that you're not at peace with yourself getting externalized and projected onto that war. Because when the war in yourself has ceased, truly ceased, then yes, you absolutely will grieve man's inhumanity to man, but it doesn't have the power to completely depress and debilitate you. And in fact, it never did. It's the war within yourself that does, that gets blamed on. Your feelings get blamed on your relationship, your job, or the war, or the genocide. Your feelings get blamed on these things. None of these things are the cause. I promise you. But to prove what I'm saying, you would have to end the war within yourself. The battle in which some parts are accepted and some parts are rejected, some parts approved and some disapproved, some loved and some hated, the internal division, which is endless, the struggle against reality as it is. When that war comes to an end, then you can accept and grieve and celebrate this world just as it is. And every moment of grief is beautiful, and every moment of celebration is beautiful. Life is beautiful. Death is beautiful. Human suffering is beautiful. It's not good. It's not approved. It's just part of the beauty of what is. I hope you consider this possibility. Om.